In future, if you're trying like this, can you just not tell me till afterwards?
We should start, as we always do, with follow-up. And the only bit of follow-up I had is to just thank people for tweeting us various vegan snacks. That made me unreasonably happy. But now I'm left with a problem, because I don't know if people tweeted us vegan snacks because it's a compelling thing to tweet, or if it's because I complained that people don't normally tweet us things.
I genuinely had to ask you if you'd left that in by mistake. But no, you knew what you were doing. You knew it was going to get a response. Don't even pretend that you're confused.
I am, because you can never truly know. I suspect it's because I complained, but I can never truly know that because I can't do the A/B test. I can't do the blind testing.
You changed too many variables at once.
Yeah.
Maybe we should ask for the exact same thing today, but without complaining about it, and see what happens.
Well, no, because I've ruined it by talking about it here at the beginning. That's the thing. I don't know how. Maybe in 50 episodes' time we can run an experiment, but while it's still fresh in people's memory, it can never work.
The only answer is to completely change the style of outro from here on. No more asking for tweets. Instead, we're going to ask for... Actually, no, Twitter is literally the only place we have. I was going to say Instagram posts, as if that's a thing we'd have. I don't even know how that works.
I don't know. We could ask for subscriptions on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, because talking about the YouTube channel really doesn't annoy you. I mean, we are on 49 right now, if we're going to mention it, but yeah, it's a horribly non-round number.
I regret everything.
Good, I'm glad. For once, you're the inconsistent one.
We also have some just other brief administrative stuff to get through before we talk about Battlebots. Battlebots have updated the rules for their show and their competition. Ryan and I know. We've seen it, we've read them. We both have many thoughts and feelings about them. But recording this show, recording and editing this show over Christmas is a nightmare. It's just really hard to find the time that we're both free. So these episodes are going to be pretty focused on Battlebots while that's going up. And then we will get back to Battlebots and the rules and Retuncti, I hope, in the new year.
What's Retuncti? I've never heard of it.
We shall refresh our memories of what on earth Retuncti is and hopefully finish it.
Yeah, Battlebots deserves our full attention. All the news around the rule changes in Battlebots deserves our full attention. And right now, they would not get that. So, a bit of separation is going to be good for the conversation.
Yeah.
So we move on into Battlebots, and what I realise in my notes I've got labelled as the wrong heat number. Let's just change that. Heat 2.
Smooth.
I'm smooth as silk, you know it. This is the episode of big laughs. That's what really defines it for me. There is so much just hilarious stuff going on. Some absolute interview gold, and some just hilarious moments in fights.
Yeah, it's been a really good episode, and I'm really enjoying the new sort of structure, the new show format for this kind of stuff, of having these more, I don't know, they feel slightly more informal interviews in some way, like on the sofa and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, the new structure around all this, I think it's good.
By the way, I looked up definitions of couch and sofa. The only dividing line I can find is that apparently the difference might be whether they have arms or not. I'm fairly sure whatever we were sitting on for those interviews has an arm on one side and not the other. It defies classification.
I mean, surely the biggest sort of differentiator between sofa and couch is what side of the, the Atlantic you're on.
I mean, that depends on your frame of reference. Well, I could argue we're on both sides of it.
No, you know what I mean. Stop trying to be difficult.
I know what you mean. I'm just going to keep calling it the couch. It feels right to me, and I don't know why.
You hurt me.
But as you say, it did have... As you say, the effect it has on the interviews is really positive. Being able to put your robot down makes it a much nicer conversation.
Yeah. Good stuff.
So the first of those interviews was for Phoenix versus Splody Boy, which is a real battle of expectations, certainly from a viewer's perspective. This whole episode kind of becomes a bit about timelines, and the performances that some robots had before Battlebots, performances they had after, I think really shaped a lot of people's expectations of who would win this heat. And this fight, at the time, felt like it was all Phoenixes. They were coming in on the back of, I think, third at Yui, where they'd done a huge amount of damage to Tempest, which was, or has been in the past, a heavily feared vert, and that was a bit of a sort of torch passing. Beat K2 in that competition as well. Looked practically unstoppable at points. Versus Splody Boy, which is a robot that no one had seen fight before. It was a completely new build.
Yeah, I definitely remember being sort of slightly scared of Phoenix while we were there. And I think it's one of those robots that is very centered around its weapon. Like, there's not a lot of armor on it. It's all in the weapon. So yeah, it's, even for someone that doesn't follow the sport as closely like me, Phoenix was a pretty scary robot.
Well, there's a good reason that we in particular were scared of Phoenix, which is that we were sat right next to the test box when it decided to flip out in the test box and literally scared the bejesus out of both of us.
Such fun. Do you have any idea what the undercutter setup that he referenced was?
You mean for Phoenix?
Yeah, for Phoenix. Because he talked about having a configuration for undercutters and then not using it because it didn't work properly.
I think the undercutter setup was simply not running any forks at all. Because he was saying at some point in the episode, I think, but this might have also been a conversation in the pits, that in the undercutter setup, he has trouble with the weapon hitting the floor. So I assume that means no forks.
Okay.
And it would make sense because it was the forks that killed the weapon in this fight. So yeah, that's my best guess for what that setup was, or would have been. In fact, that might even have been why it was flipping out in the test box, thinking about it. Might have been trying out that setup.
That's what I was just wondering. Was it testing that in the test box, which scared us, and then, yeah. Because I guess the interview would have been after that.
The timelines on the day are roughly lost to me now, but potentially, yeah.
Let's not go too far down that rabbit hole, then.
I think Splody Boy is going to be a robot that we're almost going to struggle to talk about this episode because all of its fights went so well.
Yeah, it's a formidable robot. It's funny, like, watching Rara's confidence get more and more justified throughout this episode. Like, I think she was consistent throughout the whole thing that they were going to win. But yeah, it was funny sort of seeing that come to fruition.
I think the really impressive thing with Splody Boy is that it is so composed. With an undercutter, you're expecting it to be sort of clipping the floor quite easily. You're expecting drive to be challenging at times, and it just doesn't seem to have any of those problems.
Yeah, it's crazy because, like, when you're near it when it's in the arena and stuff, you can hear, like, the weapon is so low, you can almost hear it, like, scraping the floor occasionally. It's just kind of amazing that it doesn't bite the floor and then send itself flying. It's exactly as low as it can be without being too low. It's crazy.
The whole thing is just a really, really tidy build. And it's interesting because what you have in this fight is two robots that are pretty much entirely weapon-focused. They've both got very heavy weapons on them, and that, of course, has to come at the expense of something else. In the case of Splody Boy, I suppose that's the very exposed drive system, and in the case of Phoenix, it's the very exposed weapon motor. And it just happened to be that in this fight, it was the compromise of Phoenix which cost them more.
Yeah. Yeah, because they ended this one upside down, didn't they?
Yeah, they did the thing. Although that was also based on the weapon already being down. My understanding is that if the weapon is still going, they can get out of that position just with the torque of the weapon motor.
Yeah, they did that. Well, can they do that from a cold start? Because they definitely sort of had situations where the weapon was spinning quite fast and they landed upside down and then sort of like chaotically self-righted. But like, can they self-right from a cold start?
I believe so.
Okay.
I'm happy to be proven wrong on that, but I do believe so. The other weird thing about this fight is not about this fight, it's more about me watching it. Which is that I somehow convinced myself when this fight was happening that Phoenix had managed to get the weapon tooth stuck in the floor. And watching it back, I have absolutely no idea how I thought that. But I was very excited about the prospect at the time.
Smooth. Is this when it was upside down that you thought it was stuck in the floor?
Yeah, I was very excitedly telling you that it had got stuck. I'm just glad that no mics picked that up as much as anything.
Maybe they did, and the editors have been very kind to you.
I'd like to think that at least 10% of the editor's work has just gone into getting rid of stupid things I said. I'm looking forward to seeing our interviews, because interviews have been cut down quite a lot. You know, there were a lot of questions in certainly our interview, and I believe that was the same for everyone, and they've done a really good job of tightening those right up. I think that's another reason that the interviews feel so good this year, is that they're being edited really well.
I'm so nervous about our interviews, man.
There's one thing I said that I'm upset about, and we'll see if it comes up, put it that way.
Right, before we diverge too much into talking about ourselves, have you got any more to say about Exploded Boy versus Phoenix?
No, I wouldn't be diverging into talking about us if I had any more to say.
Right then, we should move on then. We have Snappy versus Gear Down for What?
This is probably the best fight of Battlebots so far. And when I say that, I mean from the timeline of broadcast, just in case anyone tries to read anything into it. Best fight we've seen. I remember absolutely loving it live, and seeing it again recorded was even better.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. I mean, Gear Down for What is... I mean, in this fight, when it's so uncompromising about this high-speed brushless thing, it's just crazy.
There's something so much more viscerally satisfying about a robot being driven into the wall than any other, or any weapon at all actually being used. All of that shake you see on camera was visible in real life. You could see the arena shake whenever those impacts took place. It was absolutely incredible to witness.
Yeah, I mean, those body slam attacks, I guess, are some of the most satisfying to watch as well. Like when on the rare occasion that Gear Down for What manages to get Snappy sort of slammed against the wall, it's like, oh yeah. And there's also kind of that will be doing a lot of jostling around internally as well. So there's also the possibility of ending the fight that way as well. It's very impressive to see.
And it's a credit to the durability of both machines that they could do that for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it isn't just Snappy being slammed into the wall, it's Gear Down slamming itself into the wall as well.
Yeah.
And both of them have held up superbly. Am I right in thinking that you got a little chance to drive Gear Down?
I did drive it very briefly in the test arena, and so but by the time I got my hands on it, because so later on in this episode he put it down to 3S rather than 4S, and so I drove it on the 3S thing, and it is I just don't understand how you can think fast enough to do anything remotely competent with that robot. It is so quick, but it's a lot of fun to drive as well. I'd love to drive it some more.
Gareth was very generous in offering people a chance to drive, possibly just so everyone would realise what a good driver he is to have any control whatsoever. Because again, you watch his fight back, and he is not just flailing around. He is lining up attacks and going on big charges.
Yeah.
I think the weapon control is maybe a slightly different issue. I think it's particularly difficult to time the hits with the weapon. Miss swings obviously flip him over, but even then you've got the amazing pit escape that I'm going to say right now was surely intentional. And you're probably going to argue with me.
Oh, I don't know. It's really hard to tell with that kind of stuff because, there have been situations where I've been stuck on a pit and then I managed to get free of it, and it's like, I did intend to do that. And I know that if I were commentating on it, I'd be like, there's no way he meant to do that. So it's sort of, I've been on both sides of this now.
Yeah, but you've done it by driving in the correct direction. He's done it by firing his axe at the right moment to jump away from danger.
Well, so you're just helping my argument here, which is that I think there's a good chunk of that that's chance. But I can also fully, he's got the reactions to sort of drive the robot at all. So, there is the possibility that was an intentional thing, or at least half intention of let me swing the axe to get off of Snappy. And it just happened to be timed well enough for the great pit escape.
Snappy, by the way, perfect opponent for this fight. while I think we are going to naturally focus on Gear Down as the more extreme machine of the two, Snappy, as was shown last time around, I know this is a completely new version, but the idea is still the same. Snappy has proven itself to be a very effective design. And while it doesn't necessarily have the knockout power for a fight like this, again, the control, the poise, and the sort of the controlled aggression of Craig as well all contributes to making this the fight that it is.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a solid, like, well-built, well-driven, four-wheel drive robot. Like, it's a good, solid opponent, and you can sort of, it's a good chance, you've got a high probability of getting good fights out of it, and, you know, you're not going to have the fight end because Snappy broke down, really. Like, that's unlikely to happen.
Well, we'll get on to the next fight, which is one of the rare occasions where that does happen, but...
Unlikely to happen. Not impossible, but unlikely.
It's a shame for Snappy that it didn't get to face any of the horizontals, because it would also have given us some great fights there, but we got this, so we cannot be upset in any way whatsoever. I can't recall, what was your feeling for the judge's decision when you saw this first time round?
This is tricky because I think it highlighted differing definitions of the word control, which I vaguely recall taking issue with, because I think it's hard to say that Gear Down for What is controlled, or, well, I think it's hard to, like, when you talk about control in terms of combat robotics, I tend to think of that in terms of, like, controlling the fight and stuff, which at the time I was like, there's no way you can sort of say that Gear Down for What is controlling that in any way. On rewatching it, like, I've watched it a couple of times now, and I think that actually Gear Down for What does a surprisingly good job of controlling the pace of the fight as well. So I'm sort of less annoyed by the changing definitions of control, because one of the judges, I forget which, kind of talked about how hard it is to control a robot that's got all brushless drive like that, and then scored points based on that. Not in terms of how well the pace of the fight was controlled, but just how hard it is to drive a robot like... Step back, try and phrase that correctly. Control points were given because it is really hard to drive Gear Down for What, was at least my memory of what happened there anyway. And that's sort of, at the time, sort of like, not entirely convinced. Rewatching, I do think the Right Robot won.
This was the first time that we ever had an opportunity, because this was the first decision of the tournament, as I recall. It was the first time we'd had a chance to sit down with other competitors and talk about a decision. Because it took them a while to go through this one, and rightly so. And I think everyone was pretty much split 50-50. This is a judge's decision that they couldn't get wrong in our eyes. Whoever they chose was going to be a worthy winner. Complete coin toss.
I don't know, like, man, rewatching this fight now, I think if they'd given it to Snappy, I'd have been fine with it. Like, I wouldn't kick up a fuss, but I'm more happy with Gear Down for What winning.
But that's on the basis of us understanding the way that control is being defined in this case. Whereas beforehand, that wasn't something we were aware of.
How is control, like, actually defined by the judges? Like, what are they actually going on here? Do you know?
It's much harder to talk about judging for this than it is with Battlebots, because with Battlebots you've got a very tightly written document that tells you exactly how it all works. Whereas for UK live scene Beetleweights, I haven't seen any really definitive documents that are very clearly written. So my understanding of how the judging is being done comes from conversations we had with other competitors, sort of at the competition and since, and a couple of conversations I've had with judges, where I've sort of just directly asked a couple of questions about what they're looking for. The main thing that's come out of those conversations is this idea of different judges do judge slightly differently. And the sense I got of the judges we have at Battlebots is what you said in terms of control. They are factoring in how difficult is it to do what that driver is doing with that particular robot. So it's not about are you controlling the fight, it's about are you controlling your machine effectively. Which I don't like. I'll be honest, I don't like that as a way of thinking about it, but it was consistent through the competition, so that's fine.
I'm more happy with them as a winner than Snappy, not based on that definition of control. I think that Gear Down for What actually did a better job of controlling the pace of the fight than Snappy did. So even by sort of the definition of control that I'd go with, I think that that Gear Down for What wins it, which is why I think on reflection and sort of looking at the fight, while I'd be fine with either robot having won, I think that Gear Down for What is the correct choice.
For me, I think Gear Down for What, to put it in the simplest way possible, Gear Down for What misses as much as it hits. And that's not just talking about swings of the weapon. In general, I'd say about 50% of its attacks are successful. Whereas for Snappy, the number is much higher. I think where Gear Down does gain some points is that it escapes bad situations a little more effectively. But I would still, based on my idea of what control is, I would still give it to Snappy. I also think that Snappy gets itself in position to use its weapon more often, which is quite a Battlebotsy way of thinking about it. But it makes sense that if you're thinking of control as your ability to use your robot as effectively as possible, it stands to reason that the aim is to get your weapon into play, whatever that weapon may be. So for me, on that way of thinking, I would go Snappy. But at the same time, my heart was always saying Gear Down for this fight. And I think if I'd marked it at the time, I think I would have given it to Snappy. Watching it back, I would lean more towards Gear Down, but it's a 49-51 at best.
Yeah.
It's that close.
Yeah, it is a really close fight, no matter how you look at it. I think it's a really close fight.
And again, non-contentious in so many ways. Don't get used to that. we won't often call a judge's decision non-contentious. This is the outlier for Spinnerproof. One thing I wish had been done a little differently, and this is largely an interview thing, is a bit more explanation on what was meant by direct drive and by brushless and by all these other things that we half understand. Because Gear Down is a really impressive robot, and you see it moving really quickly. It's like, wow, that's really impressive. But I think the more you learn about it, the more impressive it becomes.
I think it's going to be really hard to sort of like to present that, because ultimately this is a niche event in a niche sport, and I would imagine that all the people making this are people that are really into it and know what is meant when you say direct drive and brushless and hub motors and stuff like that. And I think that the vast majority of the people watching probably also know that terminology. And I think if you explained it all, I don't know if that would become tiresome to the core audience. I don't know how mainstream a thing the intent for this to be is, if that makes sense.
I suppose in terms of audience, we're looking at a very different cross-section than, say, Battlebots. With Battlebots, the fanatics are the exception, whereas with Bogglebots, the fanatics are probably the rule.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
I can see it that way, yeah. I think it's because I want to understand it better as much as anything.
Because they did do a little bit of this exposition a bit later on with lipos and stuff.
Yes, and that was very well done, especially because Bob thought to ask the clarifying question that kind of broke through the jargon.
Yeah.
He basically went, oh, so what is a lipo?
Yeah, but like if you did that for everything, I don't know. It's a really hard thing to judge, because there obviously are people there watching who don't know everything about robots, obviously. And there are people that are new to the sport watching it as well, both live on the day and also on YouTube. And so I think there is some value in having the exposition, but I think you could go too far, and it would become, I don't know. Bogglebots is not an educational show, or not meant to be anyway. So
he's saying we're not going to have judges segments that tell us about some stupid technology we don't care about.
I mean, they could try it. I would imagine that the Bogglebots team would do a better job of it than the BBC.
That is very true. I guess the one thing I would want people to understand about Gear Down that they might not from just watching the show is the fact that it literally drives on its motors.
Yeah.
Those aren't wheels, those are motors with tyres stuck on. And that is incredibly cool. So there, I've fixed any problem that may have existed with people not understanding Gear Down. They now have a full understanding of the entire technological intent of that robot.
Yeah, because the people who didn't really understand what was going on there are clearly listening to Spinnerproof.
Well, yeah, they're listening because they know I'm going to demystify everything with my, intense educational mind.
Okay.
I was going to ask if there's anything else to say about this fight. There's loads more we could say. We could go on forever with it. Is there anything else vitally important to say about this fight?
I think we've covered everything. Both great robots, very entertaining fight. Well done, everyone.
Man, this was a great session of filming because we now get to move on to this next fight. A classic for completely different reasons. But I'm going to let you introduce it for fear of saying these wrong.
I mean, I know that I'm going to pronounce both of these things wrong, and I'm just going to be okay with that. We have, what is it, Weu versus Shark Satrakium.
And that's why I gave it to you. You can be wrong and not mind. I mind.
Oh, there's a part of me that minds. Apologies to everyone.
As if we were ever missing this fight live. There is nothing that could have come between us and being in that audience for this moment. And I am so, so glad we got to see it all.
I wonder to what extent our reasons for being there are different.
I mean, it was going to be a spectacle either way. That was my reasoning. I won't try and speak for your reasons.
What a machine Weo is. I mean, that is a remarkable feat of engineering. This full body spinner that is so flat. And I think we saw it later on and stuff a bit closer up, and like these tiny little motors. There's just no room anywhere in there. Like to charge the thing, the entire robot goes into a lipo bag. It's crazy. It is such a remarkable feat of engineering and planning, and I love it. I think it's incredible.
It's denser than a neutron star and probably almost as bright. It's a robot of superlatives. But the funny thing is that when I first saw it, I thought, oh, that weapon looks underpowered. Because it looked like it was all plastic. Well, obviously not the top, but the ring itself looked like it was plastic or something else weedy. No, that's just full-on Hardox. The whole rotating mass is something approaching half the weight of the robot. It is the definition of optimization. And again, I was talking about expectations earlier. It does help a lot that after Battlebots, this came to Euros with a couple of very important modifications and romped into second.
Yeah, and in the pits at Euros, there was a small audience a couple of times just gathered around his pit table, just marvelling and admiring that robot. It was
Whoa. That was also our pit table. I'd like to think some of them were miring hello there as well.
I know it was it was notable because we were almost completely ignored. It's like I really enjoyed the contrast there between us. But yeah, no, they were.
Honestly, we were part of the crowd. Everybody just wants to see this robot up close, and everybody wants to see it fight as well.
It's an incredible machine, and then it's going against the embodiment of childish designs. That's what I've written here.
I was already a fan of this robot. I was a fan the moment I saw a picture of it and knew it was Dave's. I was a fan of it for everything we saw at filming and the time we spent with Dave and James. All amazing stuff. I thought I couldn't be in love with it anymore until I heard that interview. Because what Dave said about this idea of sitting down and drawing a robot as a kid is exactly what I experienced over summer when I had a bunch of kids design their own robots. They just want to cover every part of it with stuff. And I could sit here and say it all again, but Dave has said it perfectly. And it was funny how I went into that over summer with the intent of maybe trying to make one of the designs. And I came away going, you couldn't make any of them. Not realising that's exactly what Dave had already done.
Yeah.
Do you remember how underweight it was?
I think it was
something under a kilo.
Yeah, it was something like half the weight of a beetle weight. It's well, because it's just cobbled together. That's cruel. I'm sorry. It's put together from ant weight parts. So yeah, it doesn't weigh very much.
I don't think Dave would mind the term cobbled at all. There's a chance that if not at this stage, definitely in the next fight, there's a good chance that it weighed less than just the spinner on Weo.
Yeah, very possibly.
You all saw it. You all know what happened. I just want to sit here and appreciate it one more time.
So you seem too enamoured with this fight. I don't understand it. I think this is a borderline pointless fight.
Do you not enjoy this fight? I shouldn't be surprised, but
I feel cruel for saying this, but I enjoy watching one of Dave Laurie's machines get blown to smithereens. There's also sadness to it as well, because I think the way that he got stuck on the floor is really rubbish. That's a really naff thing to have happened. And, I have great sympathy for that. But it was also, I don't know, the problem I have with this fight is the inevitability of it. There was no other outcome for this. I guess there's an argument to be made that Dave's master plan of hitting just yanking out the power link. I mean, if he'd done that with those pokey things, that would have been the play of the century. That would have been utterly incredible, but extremely unlikely. And every other possible future was just this being blown up. I don't know.
For what it's worth, I do agree with quite a lot of what you're saying. First of all, it was a real shame that we didn't get to see Sharksatrakian do more than just get stuck under the floor. Because it was actually a really animated robot. It needs 2 people to operate all of it. Because it's got drive and 4 other moving parts. It's got the 2 sort of arms on the side, the head and the tail. They all move, they all need controlling. It would have been really fun to see that and then it get blown up.
Yeah.
And I also agree that this fight was never a contest. Instead, it was a spectacle. If you have a competition that's all this, then that sucks. But having one fight like it, totally worth it. We're all coming to this wanting to see something get absolutely eviscerated. It might as well be the person who's there for exactly that reason. One of the fights that always stuck with me as a kid from the early series of Robot Wars was, I've forgotten the name of the opponent. It was Hypnodisc against the big green thing. Link in show notes. Everyone already knows what I'm talking about, probably with the possible exception of you. Which was Hypnodisc, a very well-engineered machine of a type that no one had seen coming, against a competently made opponent for the time that just wasn't on its level. And it's fantastic to watch the sheer destruction of that fight. The thing is ripped apart. But then you've still got the camera cutting back to the team who look like they were okay with it until about 20 seconds ago, and now they're just thinking about the cost. That's not what you have here. You have Dave and James getting exactly what they wanted from this fight. And we as an audience get to scratch that itch for something being obliterated with no one getting hurt.
Apart from the shark.
He was fine. Dave says it wasn't as bad as it looked. It really wasn't as bad as it looked. That's the crazy thing with this. That robot is like 50% air. All of the important stuff that's actually internal was fine. It was largely a question of swapping out motors and things, which, because they're kind of ant-weight standard parts, he had about 1 million of anyway.
Yeah.
The only really bad damage was the massive chunk out of the base plate, which was more a worry for everyone else who was looking at that base plate going, that's not much bigger than my top or bottom or possibly sides. I'm not thinking, by the way, that we have to agree on this fight at all.
No, I mean it was definitely fun on the day, and it's fun to watch as well. Like I'm not saying it's a terrible fight, but it's just your unabashed love for it just compels me to argue against you. I can't help it. But it was good. It was good. It's enjoyable, and yeah, we do. There is value in having the robots that are there just to be blown up. And I also just want to say that it was really lovely meeting Dave.
Oh, Dave was amazing fun to be around, and my only concern is that by having him and Nick from Sir Lancer Frog in the same room, we've got like 50% of the world's positivity in one place and everyone else is kind of missing out.
I don't know if I've said this like on the podcast or not, but I was really nervous about meeting Dave because we built so much of this podcast on the meme of me hating jellyfish. I was really nervous about that, and one of the first things that Dave said when he came over to us and was, "I hear one of you hates me," and it was like, "Oh no!" Obviously, he meant that as a joke, and it was very funny. And yeah, Dave, one of the nicest people I've met. So it was lovely. I'm glad that we got to say hello.
And he apparently has a new build in the works.
Excellent.
Which I cannot wait to see.
I can't wait to tell the world how terrible it is.
Someone's got to keep that guy down. Might as well be you. You know what we've just done? We've just transitioned out of talking about Sharks Atrakian so we can move into a fight that Sharks Atrakian is also the focus of. Well, actually, you know what? Sharks Atrakian is not the focus of this. I think the focus of this really is lipo safety, which really is the message that we all needed to hear.
So we have Snappy versus Phoenix versus Sharks Atrakian, Satrukian.
Sharks Atrakian.
Sharky.
In a way, there's not much going on in this fight, but at the same time, there's everything going on in this fight in terms of the pure drama of something almost exploding.
Yeah. It's funny, this was like, because I don't think I certainly didn't see this one live at the time. So yeah, this was like a good sort of stoppage, and I think it was handled well by everyone. I do find the continuity of the edit confusing. I'm assuming that that's just the way that the way that it worked, but the continuity of the edit is weird, in my opinion. But yeah, the battery falls out with a spinner in the arena. You've got to stop the fight. You can't carry on. It's too dangerous.
The main confusion I've seen around this, because they did a fantastic job of explaining what had happened, what the procedure was, and I agree it was a bit chaotic in the edit, but I think that's because it was probably a bit chaotic in the arena as well.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where you stop thinking about the show you're making for a while and deal with the safety first, which is absolutely correct. The main question I've seen raised is, why was this one stopped and not Gear Down versus Snappy, where you have also got a kind of loose battery?
Yeah, because Gear Down for Watt's battery is hanging out the back of it for quite a lot of that fight.
Yeah. And the difference, really, very simply, is Phoenix.
Yeah, so when Bob was talking to Tim afterwards, Tim did say this. He said, when you've got a battery hanging out and a spinner like that in there, you need to stop the fights. But he did sort of draw the distinction. I guess he just didn't sort of like put enough emphasis on it, maybe, to sort of really drive the point home. But yeah, it's because Phoenix was in there. Like, if Phoenix just nicks that battery, then it goes up in smoke and fire, and it's terrible for everyone. Whereas if you've got Snappy and Gear Down in the thing, it's quite, I would imagine, possible but quite hard to do much damage to the battery.
We are no experts, but I've had 2 experiences with lipos that have made me a little bit more confident handling them. So in a non-roboteering situation, I've literally seen one be stood on by a horse and not explode. And then at Robo Nerds, I had a battery sliced open that didn't go up. Obviously, both were quickly dealt with, stored safely, disposed of later when possible. Batteries aren't the kind of thing where you knock them and they go. It does take a little bit to do that. So in a situation where you've got the battery a bit loose in Gear Down, worst case scenario in that is probably that Gear Down retracts the hammer and catches it, which is bad, but probably not going to kill it immediately. Compare that to if Phoenix hits it, it's going up. It's probably fragmenting and going up, which means you've got multiple bits of burning lithium to deal with. That's not good at all. I understand that there are some competitions, especially in the US, I think, where if a battery is out, the fight stops, no matter the opponent. Which is fine, nice, clear rules, completely happy with that. But it would also be a shame to stop a fight when there's very little danger of anything bad happening.
Yeah, I think both approaches here are valid. I think it is very valid to just say, if a battery comes out, we're stopping the fight. Like, having a uniform, easily enforceable rule like that is a perfectly valid approach to these things. And I also think that doing it at the discretion of one or two sort of educated people who are in charge of safety and stuff, I think that's also a valid approach, to sort of say, it's up to the ref in this case, or the event organizer, or whoever, to sort of decide, is this is this fight allowed to continue because the battery's loose? I think they're both perfectly valid approaches and perfectly safe approaches to dealing with this.
And not only have you got two very experienced people arena side in both Shane and Tim, you've also got a lot of very experienced people in the audience. And it says a lot that as soon as that battery comes out, you can hear 10 or 15 people shouting, "Battery."
Yeah.
Everyone's seen that danger. Everyone knows it's not okay. Everyone wants it to be stopped and dealt with. It's also really nice that where they've put the clip in, which is of Dreadbin getting eviscerated, which I'm just glad Dreadbin made it into Battlebots, really. Not only does that show the possible effect of a fire, it also shows how seriously everyone takes it when it happens, where you can see people immediately scrambling to deal with it.
Yeah.
We saw this at Marlow as well, at the FRA Champs. As soon as a fire does happen, action stations, everyone knows exactly what they're doing. I've always been incredibly impressed by just how quickly, in that case, Shane got in and just had that dealt with. Such a well-oiled machine.
No messing around.
And I suppose, as first-timers at an event as well, it's this kind of thing that does give you confidence that you're in good hands. You know it already just because of where you are. But just the little things like this, all of the stuff we sort of saw around the use of the test arena as well, going through tech check, you know you're in a good place. You know you're looked after.
Yeah.
And then Sharks of Trakian also drove on its side, which is really fun.
That was funny, and yeah, so Snappy was considered knocked out and removed, and which means that Sharks of Trakian did not come dead last in this fight, which I do find quite funny.
See, I'd argue that order is only established in the Dung Beetle. I would say that anyone who is knocked out in the melee, you consider it to be simultaneous, and then you take the order from the Dung Beetle at the end. Because this series, in principle, we're going to get a complete 1 to 30.
Oh, blimey. According to who?
We'll let someone else work that out.
Yeah. Making promises you can't keep there, Ryan.
If necessary, I will do the 1 to 30.
So Phoenix won this, unsurprisingly.
I'd say I wouldn't have wanted to rule Snappy out. It was a very decisive way to go out, and it's not a robot that's necessarily optimised for taking on robots like Phoenix. It's a very hardy machine, and I think it's just, in this case, teething problems of a new build.
Yeah, you're right. I unsurprising given that Snappy had already gone. I'm sorry. Yes, no. Given if had Snappy continued, then yes, I think it would have been a much closer fight than it was.
It's unsurprising once you've seen it, but at the time, this didn't seem like a foregone conclusion of a fight.
Yeah, you are correct.
So now, more Phoenix.
More Phoenix. We have Phoenix versus Gear Down for what? And at this point, Gear Down has been geared down, I believe. It's on 3S, but not quite geared down, I suppose. But 3S rather than 4S battery. So a little slower, a little more controlled, ostensibly.
I feel like, in the spirit of wanting more things to be explained, I should explain what that means. That's a 25% reduction in power. Just put that out there. Everyone already knows, but I've got to be the change I want to see in the world.
Yeah, lower voltage battery, basically.
I'm also now really worried that's not technically true. There might be some weird curve to all of it.
Yeah, I don't know how it works. All I know is less power and therefore slower motors, but still ridiculously fast because there's no gearboxes involved.
There was, by the way, a genuine concern at filming that the cameras wouldn't properly pick up Gear Down at some points.
This robot is one that would definitely benefit from having a 60 frames per second video.
Maybe they should get in some high-speed cameras just for Gear Down fights.
Get the slow-mo guys involved.
Play it back at half speed. Commentators at full speed. Just give them a chance to keep up.
Yeah.
This wasn't really the fight to demonstrate what Gear Down can do, unfortunately. It was a fairly quick and decisive death.
Yeah, this is what happens when you've got your link hanging around out the back of your robot.
Link placement is so hard on a hammer.
Yeah.
Especially a hammer that is as ridiculously weapon-focused as Gear Down is. Or weapon and drive focused, I suppose, in their case. There isn't much body that you can mount a link to. And the key thing with a link is that it has to be away from the weapon and away from the drive. If you're all weapon and all drive, where are you supposed to put it?
Yeah. There's no good place really on Gear Down to put it. But yeah, where they had it was the downfall in the end. It got nicked and pulled out.
I'd argue that hit was putting Gear Down out regardless, because it also took that motor out on the right-hand side.
Ah,
So even if the link stays in, it's still just driving around in circles.
fair enough.
So in that case, it's some smart link placement. Put it in a place that if you get hit, you're dead anyway.
I really enjoyed in this fight how quickly Tim spotted that the link had been knocked out and was like already counting down while pointing out the link, being like he knew where this was going, just sort of like counting down as a formality while pointing to the link on the arena floor. It was very funny.
This episode is just low key an ode to Tim's vigilance. This is the Tim notices things episode. You know what I noticed though?
What did you notice?
The very small but very relatable point from Ralph in the pits afterwards about remembering to take photos of stuff. I'm not someone who takes many photos of things. I'm not someone that necessarily values photos that much. My biggest regret from Battlebots is that we didn't get more photos of cool stuff that had happened.
It's really hard to take lots of pictures, and unless you sort of just make a habit of doing it all the time, it's hard to sort of do it on these occasions because I don't know, at least for me, it's sort of like you got to remember to get your phone out or whatever to take a picture, and you sort of like I always feel like I'm sort of like leaving the moment to do that, which I guess is a bit of a cliched thing to say these days, but yeah.
That's exactly my issue with photos in general.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'm sat here thinking, damn, I wish I'd got a picture of this and this and this and this. Part of that is purely a podcast thing of, oh, I'd love to put that in the show notes. But part of it is also just, damn, that was such an intense weekend that I couldn't remember everything. And I wish I had some record of it. Which seemingly is what Ralph went through last year, and this year has rectified that by remembering to do exactly that.
Maybe next time we'll take more photos.
We'll just strap a GoPro to you constantly.
God. I think we can move on.
Absolutely. Up next, we have Splody Boy versus Wayu.
Indeed. We have some more extreme confidence from Rara in the interview here. Still very funny.
And once again, completely justified.
Completely justified. Didn't get her tiara in the end, but it's justified nonetheless.
Again, we're saying this, I think going into this, at the time, you would barely have given Splody Boy a prayer.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, it was sort of like, you know, at best evens, really. They're both powerful.
It's very generous, I think.
Well, it's hard to know how I felt at the time because obviously, you know, so much of my opinion of all these robots has been coloured by events since. So I don't know how I would have judged it at the time, but you know, yeah, evens, maybe that is generous. In any case, both sort of good-looking, powerful robots, and a good fight either way. You know, you got these two big spinners in there. You sort of, you know, you expect great things.
I think I need to justify my statement there for the record. The thing that to me made this Wayu's fight was just the apparent lack of ways for Splody Boy to damage it. Normally, the one thing about an undercutter is that whatever the opponent, they can get to the wheels or something else important on the underside. But Wayu is so low down that in comparison to it, Splody Boy is basically a mid-cutter. And the only thing it seemed like they could hit was the ring, which you don't really imagine doing any damage. And then what did they do? They found a way for that to do damage.
This is going to sound like one of those things that's like, oh, you know, Sam's trying to sound clever with hindsight and stuff. So I'm not going to claim to have predicted this, but I will say I'm not surprised by the way that Wayu lost there, because it is such a tight robot with such tight tolerances. I'm not surprised that in the end, like a hit would cause something internally to move just 0.5 millimeter or whatever tiny tolerances it is, enough to short something out or jam something up or whatever happened in there. It's not surprising the way this fight ended, really, to me anyway.
I was expecting maybe a pitting, and that was about the only route for victory I really saw. And I was completely wrong, as we can clearly see, to the point where I probably don't need to point it out. While we can talk about weapon power and we can talk about the sort of internal complexity of Wayu, so much of this, I think, comes down to driving. There are so many parts of Splody Boy that Wayo could have hit and probably instantly wrecked it. And Jeremy has managed to keep the front pointing constantly.
Yeah.
The only place he's taken any hits was with his weapon. The speed with which he's recovered from hits to get facing up again is incredible. That sounded like there was a third thing coming. There wasn't.
This is a common occurrence for you, sounding like you're listing things, but you're not.
Well, there are 3 reasons for that, though.
Yeah, I agree. This Splendid Boy was very well driven to keep the non-fragile part pointed at the big scary frisbee at all times is no mean feat.
And once again, they've come through this with genuinely little to no damage.
Yeah.
Wayo, meanwhile, was in pretty bad shape, as I recall.
Yeah, like it didn't have many spare parts, and because it's a really tight robot to sort of do anything in. It's one of those things that is, I think once you optimize a robot for size like that, it becomes a challenge to retain serviceability. I think that was part of the problem there. Because once you knock one thing just sort of slightly off center or nick it in such a way, because it doesn't take much to do that, so you're talking like millimeters of clearance for things, and so yeah, sort of getting it all running perfectly smoothly again after a big fight like that is a challenge.
So as I recall, the challenge wasn't necessarily getting it running again. The challenge was getting it running properly again.
Yeah, getting it to go without self-destructing every time the weapons span and stuff like that, because it's just sort of, you need to get everything so perfectly aligned again and balanced.
A worthwhile compromise to have something so beautiful, though.
Yeah.
Again, unfortunately, a fight that we can't say that much about because it's spectacular while it lasts, but it's over quickly, and we've got one undamaged robot and one that's completely in trouble. Splody Boy's got the K2 problem. Who'd have seen that coming?
It's too stable. You guys need to fix it. You guys need to go and make that a bit more of a glass cannon, please.
I have found myself in the build-up to this episode trying to intentionally underplay Splody Boy a little bit, because everyone clearly had their expectations built on things like Euros. I didn't want to kind of hype it at all. Just let it stay as an underdog. Let the story live, let it breathe. Do we want to talk about the final, or do we want to just replay what we said for the first fight?
Yeah, so once again we have Phoenix versus Splody Boy. Yeah, this was a pretty much a replay of the first fight in so many ways. Phoenix lost its weapon and then ended up upside down.
It is at least a more spectacular version.
Oh yeah, the any fight where a robot hits the ceiling is a good fight, really.
This is ceiling strike number 1 for the series. We will keep count as we go.
You're making more promises you can't keep.
Oh, I think I can keep that one. That's fine.
Yeah, but will you?
It's just counting upwards.
What if they hit the floor? Do you have to decrement the counter again? Or do you decrement on pittings?
When you say hitting the floor, would that mean that whenever a robot is in contact with the floor, I'm then counting down? And if so, at what speed? Is it like frame by frame, second by second? We gotta get the parameters in place here.
I think you've got to be counting down once per plank time for as long as the robot is in contact with the floor.
Do you have to do the same with how long it's in contact with the ceiling?
Yeah, that's only fair.
There's nowhere to go from that. I'm sorry.
Well, it was a spectacle fight. Spectacle fight.
2 pairs of glasses just going at it.
It was a fight with much spectacle for as short as it was, and yeah, good stuff. And Splody Boy won. They are the Heat final winner, Heat winner. There we go. I can work.
Grand finalist, Heat winner.
There we go. Thank you.
Scary bot. This episode kind of highlights the fact that Battlebots isn't a battle between good and evil, it's a battle between confidence and self-deprecation. And in this case, confidence has won. The fact they called their shot for that final and executed it perfectly.
Yeah, how are you going to win? Exactly the same way I did the first time. Boom!
It's like, no matter what happens from here, you're taking that home, aren't you? But so far in the series, confidence is definitely winning.
Yeah.
Mark with K2, very chilled, very confident. Rare and Jeremy with Splody Boy, very confident.
Rare are very confident. Jeremy less so.
I wouldn't mistake quietness for a lack of confidence.
I suppose it's like loudly confident and quietly confident, isn't it?
Exactly. It is the two sides of the confidence coin. And, Jeremy, whilst he's a first Beetle weight, he's made some very effective ants in the past. He's a good driver. I think coming in to any event with a new machine is going to be nerve-wracking for people. Again, we've seen the two sides of that coin as well with Snappy. But he must have known that what he had there, provided it all worked, was going to be pretty potent.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/63, and there you can find links to all the stuff we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us the hex code for your favourite shade of green.